He was born in the early hours of the 26th of July in the back section of a primate facility in Japan. It was the middle of summer. His mother was a first-time mother. She looked at him once. Then she moved to the far side of the enclosure and did not come back. He was left on the floor. Less than 400 grams. Fur, not yet grown in at the shoulders or along the spine. Skin pale pink exposed, no insulation, no fat reserves, nothing between him and the July air. A newborn macaque cannot regulate its own body temperature. It depends entirely on its mother, on her body heat, her milk, the press of her against its skin to keep the internal systems from tipping past the point they can recover from. Without that, in the middle of summer, the body begins to lose water faster than it can hold it. The heart works harder. The brain runs on less than it needs. The window is not wide. He had been in the world for minutes. He did not know what the world was. He only knew to reach for something. His hands were already moving, reaching, closing around nothing. The keeper on duty found him within minutes. He did not hesitate. He crossed the enclosure, crouched down, and lifted the small animal with both hands, the way he had been trained. Spine level, lower body supported. He carried him out of the heat and into a room with 4 concrete walls and a fluorescent tube and a shelf stacked with cotton towels still warm from the radiator. What happened in that room over the next 8 days is a long story. What happened on the 9th day changed everything. His name is Punch. And what 2 ordinary men did for the 176 days that followed twice a day, without missing once, without being asked twice. It is the kind of thing that doesn't make the news. It just makes a life. The corridor behind the primate facility is narrow. Concrete walls on both sides. The ceiling low enough that the fluorescent light from inside the care room bleeds out into the hallway, even during the day. At 6:58 in the morning, the sound of rubber boots on concrete travels far in a space that small. Macaque stopped at the iron door. He pulled his keys from his jacket pocket, found the right one without looking. The lock turned. The door opened. The room inside was 4 concrete walls. A fluorescent tube overhead, a shelf along the left wall holding formula bottles in a row, cotton towels folded into squares, and a log binder with a pen clipped across the top. No windows. No natural light. In the right corner, a small shape was curled against something orange and soft. The shape lifted its head when it heard the door. It looked directly at Macaque. It did not come forward. It only looked. Macaque lowered himself to the cold floor. He set the small plastic bottle between them, the rubber nipple clouded from the previous night's feeding. He waited. Kano had been on shift that morning. He was 24 years old, in his 3rd month at the facility, and he lifted Punch with both hands, the way he had been shown, supporting the lower body, keeping the spine level. Punch was smaller than he had expected. He was also heavier than he had expected. The fur along his shoulders and back had not yet grown in fully. Pink skin showed through in the thin places. His face was flushed red at the cheeks, dark at the nose. His eyes were open, and they moved. Kano carried him into the care room and set him onto a cotton towel that had been warmed on the radiator shelf. He folded the 2 near edges of the towel up around the sides. He sat down on the floor beside it. The first object they tried was a rolled towel shaped into a cylinder about the length of a forearm. Punch could hold it with both arms, but could not grip it. His fingers found no texture, no resistance, no depth. He shifted continuously. He did not sleep more than 15 or 20 minutes at a time. A macaque infant needs something to cling to, needs it the way a human infant needs warmth. The clinging is not a comfort behavior that develops over time. It is the mechanism by which the muscles learn tension, by which the nervous system learns where the body is in space. Without a grip point, Punch's body did not know where it was. So it kept searching. The second object was a wire frame shaped loosely like a larger primate, with a formula bottle fixed at the chest. Punch fed from it, but he would not press himself into it. He leaned forward to drink and then pulled back. He never rested his weight against the frame. After each feed, he moved away from it and sat with his arms wrapped around himself. The third object was a brown stuffed bear, medium-sized with a soft seam down the center. Punch sniffed it for 3 seconds, then he turned his head away. The fourth was a cream-colored fleece square folded thick. He slept against it for a few minutes. Then he startled awake and began shifting again. Macaque picked up each object after Punch moved away from it. He turned it over, set it back down. At the end of each trial, he opened the log binder, wrote 1 line, and slipped the pen back into the clip. He turned to the next page. He did not write conclusions. He wrote observations. On the 9th day, he brought in a stuffed orangutan. It was made by a furniture company, more known for its flat-pack bookshelves than its soft toys, orange, with long synthetic fur dense enough to grip from multiple angles, a wide body, and a face that bore a loose resemblance to a primate. Macaque set it on the floor beside Punch without ceremony. He stepped back 1 pace. Punch sniffed it. He came closer. He put 1 hand on the orange fur, then the other. Then he pulled the shape toward him and wrapped both arms around it. He did not let go. Macaque stood still and watched for about 10 seconds. Then he walked to the iron door, opened it, and closed it behind him, more quietly than usual. From that night forward, the schedule was fixed. 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening. 2 keepers alternating. No days off. The log binder now had entries that ran longer. Feeding duration, weight, clinging behavior, rated on a simple scale overnight, notes if there had been any. Macaque's footsteps were heavier and more even. The sound of boots that had walked the same corridor 1,000 times. Kano moved slightly faster at the last bend before the care room. Punch had learned to tell them apart before the key touched the lock. He recognized Macaque by the weight of the step and the spacing between them. He recognized Kano by the slight difference in pace at that final turn. He did not come forward when the door opened. He waited. But he was already awake. He had already been listening. The towels on the shelf were always folded the same way. 2 folds lengthwise, then 3 across, stacked with the open edge facing the same direction. Kano had started doing it that way because that was how Macaque did it. He had not been told to. He had watched it done once and then done it the same way every time after. The care room smelled of formula and clean cotton and the particular flat mineral smell of concrete that never fully goes away, no matter how often the floor is washed. The fluorescent tube above hummed faintly. It was the only sound in the room between feeds. The log binder had a blue cover slightly worn at the corners. The first entry was dated the morning of July 26th. 1 line weight feed time behavior. By the end of the 2nd week, the entries were longer. By the end of the 3rd, Macaque had begun adding a 2nd category at the bottom of each page, not observations about the animal, but about the room itself. Temperature at time of feed. Whether the towels had been changed. Which bottle had been used. Small details that seemed unnecessary until the day you needed them. Kano read the earlier entries, sometimes in the quiet minutes before a feed. He read them the way you read the notes someone left before you, in a shared space, trying to understand not just what had been recorded, but what had been intended by the recording. In the early weeks, Punch did not move far from the orange shape. If he was disturbed a loud noise from outside an unfamiliar voice in the hallway, he pressed himself back into it and held on until the disturbance passed. The orange fur was compressed in 2 places, where his hands always landed first. The left compression was slightly deeper than the right, his dominant hand finding the same grip every time without variation. The care room did not change. The shelf was always in the same position. The binder was always in the same spot. The bottle was always placed in the center of the floor between keeper and animal. None of this had been discussed. It had simply become the way things were done. At 4 weeks, Punch weighed slightly over 900 grams. His fur had grown in more fully at the shoulders. His grip was stronger. During one of the morning handling checks, Kano lifted him from the floor and sat back down against the wall. He was checking the weight, a routine thing, 30 seconds done and recorded. Punch did not want to be set back down. He gripped the front of Kano's light blue jacket with both hands, fabric bunched between his fingers, and pressed his face into the chest of it. Kano sat still. He did not reach up to detach the hands. He did not shift his position. He sat with his back against the concrete wall and waited, the way he had learned to wait, the way the room had taught him. After several minutes, Punch loosened his grip on his own. He slid down, landed on the floor, and walked back to the orange shape without looking up. Kano noted the duration in the log binder. He wrote it as a number minutes decimal, the way Miyakoshi had written everything before him. He did not write what it had felt like to sit still for that long with something small holding on. Some things were not the kind of thing the log binder was for. There was another morning a few days later when Miyakoshi arrived for the 7 o'clock feed and found Punch already awake and sitting near the iron door rather than in his usual corner. Not at the door, near it. Close enough that when Miyakoshi opened it, Punch was the first thing he almost stepped on. He stopped. Punch looked up at him. Miyakoshi set the bottle down where he was standing in the space between the door and the center of the room, and then sat down on the floor right there, not in his usual spot, not at the usual distance. He sat where the situation asked him to sit. Punch moved to the bottle. He drank with one hand on the orange shape and one hand on the bottle, and his eyes on Miyakoshi the whole time. Miyakoshi did not move until the bottle was empty. Then there was the afternoon that became the one Kano mentioned to Miyakoshi afterward, quietly in the corridor. He had arrived early, not for a feed, just to check the temperature in the room, which had been running slightly warm. He unlocked the door and stepped in. Punch was in the center of the room with the orange shape. He looked at Kano. Then he stood up, crossed the floor, and walked directly to Kano's legs. He put both hands against Kano's right boot, black rubber cold from the corridor, and pressed the side of his face against the fabric of the trousers above it. He stayed like that. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. Then he walked back to the center of the room and sat back down with the orange shape as if nothing had happened. Kano stood at the door for a moment longer. Then he checked the temperature gauge on the wall. He wrote it in the binder. He left. In the log binder under the week's summary, Miyakoshi wrote 3 words. He did not read them back aloud. He closed the binder. He clipped the pen back in place. He set it on the shelf. At 4 weeks, the question in the log binder was no longer about weight. The entry was longer than usual, written across the bottom of the page and continued in the margin. At the end of it, a single-line reintroduction attempt. Every day in the care room was a day. Punch learned the rhythm of people rather than the rhythm of a troop. He was learning feeding time's footstep patterns, the sound of a specific key in a specific lock. He was not learning the vocalizations of other macaques, the hierarchy of a group, the particular physical grammar of a species he would eventually need to understand in order to survive among them. The longer they waited, the wider that gap became. The decision was not made lightly. It was also not delayed. Kano cleaned the contact area the morning before the attempt. He moved the orange shape from the center of the room to the corner by the door. Not disposed of, not hidden, just moved aside. He refolded the towels on the shelf and stacked them flush with the edge. He set the log binder on the lower shelf instead of the upper. Small adjustments. The kind you make when you need the space to be different without being able to say exactly why. The mother had not been separated entirely. She was in the adjacent section, accessible through a mesh partition. On the first day, she did not approach. She did not retreat either. She moved along the far wall, paused occasionally near the partition, and then moved on. Punch stayed close to the mesh. He sat with both hands on the wire fingers curled through the small square openings. He watched her. The second day was similar to the first. The third day, she was slightly closer to the center of her section. Punch was still at the mesh. The mother's milk had stopped. This was not a failure of willingness, it was physiology. The body stops producing milk when feeding does not happen consistently, when the trigger that sustains it is removed. By the time a reintroduction becomes possible, The mechanism is often already gone. Punch could feed from her only in the smallest amounts, then less than that. On the fourth day, he was less active. He sat in the same corner for long stretches. He did not go back to the mesh as often. He did not explore. On the fifth day, Kano placed Punch on the scale. He looked at the number. He looked at the number from the previous day in the binder. He set the scale down carefully on the floor with both hands. He walked out of the care room into the concrete hallway. He put his back against the cold wall and looked toward the far end of the corridor where the hallway turned and the light from the main building reached just barely. He stood there for a while. He did not take out his phone. He did not write anything down. He stood there until his breathing was normal again. The hallway was cold. The fluorescent light from the care room reached just to the edge of the turn and no further. He stood in it for a while. Then he walked back. He said 3 words to Kano. Kano walked back into the care room. He crossed to the corner by the door where the orange shape had been moved. He crouched down and picked it up with both hands. He carried it back to the center of the room and set it down in front of Punch. Punch reached for it immediately. He pulled it close. He held on more tightly than he had on the 9th day. His grip lasted without releasing for nearly 4 minutes. Kano sat on the floor across from him. He did not move closer. He did not speak. He sat. That evening at 7 o'clock, Macaque came as scheduled. He walked the corridor, his boots on the concrete, the key in the lock. The door opened. He crossed to the center of the room and set the bottle on the floor between himself and Punch. The soft sound of plastic on cold concrete. Punch did not reach for it. He looked at Macaque. He looked at the orange shape in his arms. He looked at Macaque again. For 3 days, there had been no 7 in the morning, no 7 in the evening. The arrivals that had been as reliable as the light change had stopped without explanation. The bottle had appeared and then not appeared, and Punch had no framework for understanding why. He had not gone hungry. The keepers had maintained feeds through the reintroduction protocol, only differently, only with the rhythm altered. But the rhythm was not only about food. The rhythm was the structure on which everything else rested. Without it, the room was different. The same 4 walls, the same ceiling, the same light, but different. Macaque did not reach toward Punch. He did not make a sound. He sat on the cold floor with the bottle placed between them, and he waited. The fluorescent tube above them hummed. The concrete held its cold. After some time, it was not a short time, Punch extended one arm. His hand closed around the bottle. He pulled it toward himself and began to drink with the orange shape held against his side with the other arm. He did not look away from Macaque while he drank. Macaque did not look away either. He sat still until the bottle was empty. He picked it up from the floor. He stood. He walked to the door. He closed it behind him without rushing. The next morning, 7 o'clock. Boots in the hallway. Key in the lock. Bottle on the floor. Punch reached for it before Macaque had finished sitting down. In the log binder under the date, Kano had written the weight from that morning, and then below it, a single word. He had not been sure it was appropriate to write. He wrote it anyway. He clipped the pen back across the top of the binder. He put the binder on the upper shelf where it had always been before the reintroduction week. November passed. December passed. The towels on the shelf were folded the same way every day. The bottles were replaced when empty. The log binder filled. Punch grew. At 2 months, his weight crossed 1.5 kilograms. His face deepened in color. His grip, when tested during handling checks, was strong enough that releasing required deliberate effort on the part of the keeper. He still recognized the difference between Macaque's step and Kano's step before the door opened. He still waited. He still only looked at first. But the looking had changed. It was not the cautious assessment of an animal uncertain of what the door would bring. It was something closer to acknowledgement, like checking in, like confirming. Yes, you again. Good. In January of the following year, Macaque opened a second door. It was set into the eastern wall of the care room, a door that Punch had lived beside for months without it ever opening. Cold air came through first, then light. Not the flat white of the fluorescent tube. Natural light, the kind that shifts and varies. The kind the care room had never had. Monkey Mountain was outside. 3 concrete walls enclosing a space about the size of a small parking lot. The surfaces textured and broken by artificial rock formations, arranged in steps and shelves with ledges at varying heights and a small rock hollow built into the northern wall at ground level. 60 macaques lived there. Their sounds, vocalizations, movement. The particular percussion of small bodies jumping between rock surfaces were present and continuous in a way the care room was not. Punch stood at the threshold. He did not step through. He looked at the light. He looked at the shapes moving in the middle distance. He looked at the concrete ground that continued from inside to outside without a seam. He stood there for nearly a minute. Then he walked back to the center of the care room and pressed himself against the orange shape. Macaque did not follow him inside. He stayed near the open door. He sat down against the exterior wall in the thin winter light. He did not call. He did not move toward the doorway. He sat. At 7 o'clock, he set the bottle on the floor just inside the threshold, halfway between outside and in. Punch came for it without hesitation. He drank. He went back to his corner. The door stayed open. The second day, Punch stepped outside. 4 steps. He looked in every direction rapidly, then came back inside. The third day, 7 steps. He found a small rock near the entrance and sat on it for about 3 minutes before retreating. He had not interacted with any of the 60 other animals. He had not moved toward them. He had also not been approached. The troop was aware of him the way a large body of water is aware of a stone dropped near its edge, a disturbance at the periphery that registers and then continues. Over the following weeks, the distance increased. 15 minutes outside, then half an hour, then sessions long enough that when Kano arrived for the 7 o'clock feed, he sometimes had to wait for Punch to come back in from the mountain. He always came back, sometimes quickly, sometimes after a few minutes, but always back. Kano learned not to stand in the doorway. He learned to set the bottle just inside and then sit at the usual distance, the same distance he had always maintained in the care room. The spacing that had become a kind of language between them. The troop's rock formations had particular features that Punch learned gradually. The large flat shelf near the northern wall caught the most morning sun. The mid-level ledge on the eastern side was frequently occupied by the same 2 adult females and was therefore worth approaching carefully or not at all. The narrow channel between 2 artificial boulders near the center was almost always empty and offered a clear view in 2 directions. He learned these things the way all young macaques learn them, through presence, through error, through the slow accumulation of observation. When Kano stepped into the feeding area to distribute produce, Punch came to him. Not frantically. He crossed the ground between them at a trot, reached Kano's feet, placed both hands briefly against the side of Kano's boot, looked up. 1 second, maybe 2. Then he pushed off and moved back toward the mountain. Kano did not reach down. He had learned not to reach down. He stood still while it happened and then continued his route. In the log binder, they had started a 3rd one. Now, this behavior was logged under a category Macaque had added, without announcement, social anchoring human. Kano had not known what to call it either. He had written it differently the first few times. Then he had started using Macaque's term. It seemed right. In February, Punch discovered the rock hollow in the northern wall. It was narrow at the entrance and opened slightly inside, large enough for 1 small macaque. He spent part of an afternoon exploring it, going in, coming out, going in again from a slightly different angle. He disappeared inside for about 10 minutes. When he emerged, he was pulling the orange shape behind him, with one hand dragging it through the opening by one long, synthetic arm. He took it to a flat rock nearby. He arranged himself against it. He slept. The afternoon light was on the concrete wall above him. The orange fur was visible against the gray stone. Kano noted the time in the log binder. He did not write an interpretation. He wrote the time and what he had observed, and then he wrote the weather clear 7 degrees, because Miyakoshi had always written the weather. He had started doing it too. He did not know exactly when. By March, the orange shape appeared less frequently on the mountain. Some days Punch left it in the care room. Some days he brought it part way and left it at a specific rock near the entrance, returning to it periodically throughout the morning. Some days he carried it to the hollow and left it there and spent the rest of the time moving freely through the formation without it. He still slept with it. The feeding rhythm had not changed. 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening. This had not been discussed as a permanent arrangement. It had simply continued. No one had proposed stopping it. The log binder continued to fill. The weight entries now showed a curve that moved steadily upward. Punch had passed 2 kilograms in February and was approaching 2.5. His face had deepened further, the pink of infancy shifting toward the darker flush of a developing male. His movements on the mountain were less tentative. He used the full range of the formation. He had begun to establish a position within the troop's social structure, not dominant, not marginal. Somewhere in the careful middle ground that young males occupy while they are still learning the rules. The other macaques were not indifferent to him. A few of the juveniles had begun to approach him on the mountain. Cautious sideways approach is the kind where the animal pretends not to be moving toward you until it is already beside you. Punch responded in kind. He had learned that language somewhere from watching. He had not been taught it. By late March, the mornings had a different quality of light. The concrete walls of Monkey Mountain held the morning sun earlier than in the winter months. And by 8 o'clock, there was warmth on the upper ledges that had not been there in January. Punch had found the warmest of these, a wide flat surface near the midpoint of the eastern wall, and had begun arriving there most mornings within the first half hour of going out. He was not always alone there. Sometimes a juvenile female from the troop's middle cohort was already occupying the spot when he arrived. He would sit at the far end. She would shift slightly. Neither of them would move. They would sit in the same patch of sunlight without looking directly at each other until the angle changed and the warmth moved on. This was noted in the log binder. Miyakoshi had written 4 words beside the entry in the margin with the pen turned sideways so the handwriting ran up the page. Kano read them that evening. He nodded. He did not write anything additional. April came. The troop moved differently with it. Morning gatherings, shifted position, the juveniles ranged further during the middle hours. The social calendar of a macaque group runs on its own logic, with affiliations forming and dissolving over weeks in ways that are not always visible until you have been watching for long enough. Miyakoshi had been watching for 11 years. He noted the changes without comment. He added a column to the log binder's weekly summary page and wrote dates. Kano copied the format into his own entries without being asked. On the 142nd day, something happened that did not have a column. Punch was on the mountain with the orange shape positioned at the hollow entrance, as he sometimes did in the mornings, leaving it at a fixed point before ranging further out. A juvenile male who had been growing bolder over the previous weeks approached the hollow entrance. He sniffed the orange shape. He touched it with one hand. Punch was watching from a ledge about 4 meters away. He came down from the ledge at a walk, not a run. He crossed the ground to the hollow entrance. He sat between the juvenile and the orange shape. Not aggressively. He simply occupied the space. He looked at nothing in particular. The juvenile, after a moment, moved on. Punch picked up the orange shape. He carried it up to the warm ledge on the eastern wall. He sat with it. He looked out across the formation. Kano was watching from the feeding station binder open on the ledge beside him. He wrote the time. He wrote what had happened in plain sentences. He wrote the weather. He clipped the pen back in place. He stood still for a moment longer, looking at the eastern ledge. Then he continued his route. The 168th day was a Tuesday. Kano arrived at 6:55. He walked the corridor. The concrete was cold under his boots late April, but the stone held the night temperature longer than the air did. He unlocked the care room door. The shelf was as he had left it the night before. The log binder on the upper shelf. The extra formula bottle in the wire rack. The spare towels folded in the corner. He picked up the morning bottle. He carried it to the eastern door, the one that opened onto the mountain. He set the bottle down just inside the threshold. He sat at the usual distance. Punch was already outside. He was on the eastern ledge in the spot where the morning sun arrived first. The orange shape was beside him. He was not asleep. He was sitting upright, looking out across the mountain toward the northern wall, where several members of the troop were already moving in the early light. He did not turn when Kano set the bottle down. He did not come for it immediately. He sat and watched the movement across the mountain for a while longer. Kano did not call. He sat at the threshold with the bottle beside him and the pale morning coming in through the open door. After some minutes, Punch stood. He picked up the orange shape. He came down from the ledge at his own pace, crossing the open ground of the mountain, stepping through the doorway and into the care room. He set the orange shape down beside him. He sat on the concrete floor. He reached for the bottle. Kano did not move. He waited until Punch had the bottle and had begun to drink. Then he opened the log binder across his knee. Day 168. He wrote the date. He wrote the weight from the previous day's check. He wrote what he had observed. He wrote the weather clear, 11 degrees light wind from the north. Outside, through the open eastern door, the sounds of the troop continued movement on rock, the particular vocalizations of a group going through its morning routines. Punch drank. He held the orange shape against his side with one arm. He looked at the doorway. Light came through it and fell on the concrete floor. He did not look at Kano. He did not need to. That evening, Miyakoshi arrived at 6:58. Boots in the corridor, key in the lock. He opened the door. The care room was as it always was. The shelf along the left wall, the log binder, the light from the fluorescent tube. Punch was in the center of the room. The orange shape was in his lap. He looked up when the door opened. Miyakoshi crossed the room to the center. He lowered himself to the floor. He took the evening bottle from his jacket pocket, still warm from where he had been carrying it. He set it on the floor between them. He waited. Punch reached for it. He drank. Through the small window near the top of the eastern wall, a window that had been there since the room was built too high to see out of from the floor, the last of the day's light was going. The sounds from the mountain were quieter now. The troop had settled for the night. The fluorescent tube hummed. The concrete held its cold. Miyakoshi did not move. He sat still until the bottle was empty. He picked it up from the floor. He looked at Punch for a moment, at the orange fur compressed in the two familiar places, at the small dark eyes that held steady. He stood. He walked to the iron door. He closed it. He walked the corridor back toward the main building. The corridor was the same as it had always been. Narrow, concrete on both sides. The ceiling the same height it had been on the first morning. The sound of boots on the floor carrying the full length of it. He had walked this corridor twice a day for 176 days, 352 times. He had not counted. No one had been counting. It had simply accumulated the way time accumulates when you are not watching it, day by day, entry by entry, one line in the log binder at a time. No one had been thanked. No one had asked to be. The work had been done because it was the next thing to do, and then the thing after that, and then the thing after that. 7 in the morning, 7 in the evening. The corridor, the key, the door, the bottle on the floor. That was the whole job. That was everything.